There are cases that haunt detectives for decades. Cases that sit in the back of their minds like a splinter buried too deep to remove. Cases where every lead goes cold, every witness goes silent, and every answer only brings more questions. This is one of those cases. Her name was Clara Voss, 29 years old, a school teacher who spent her weekdays shaping young minds, and her weekends painting landscapes by the lake. She had a warm smile, a quiet laugh, and a habit of leaving little notes of encouragement for her students on their desks every Monday morning. By all accounts, Clara Voss was the kind of person the world needed more of. And on the night of October 14th, she vanished. Not slowly, not gradually, just gone, like a candle flame cupped by an invisible hand. The last person to see Clara Voss alive was never found. And what followed was one of the most chilling, most twisted, most emotionally devastating investigations the small town of Harlow Creek had ever seen. This is her story. Harlow Creek was the kind of town that looked perfect from the outside. Neat little houses with flower boxes on the windows. A main street with a bakery, a hardware store, and a diner that had been serving the same apple pie recipe since 1974. Children rode their bikes without helmets because nobody thought anything bad could ever happen here. That was the illusion. And like most illusions, it shattered the moment you looked too closely. Detective Ray Malone had lived in Harlow Creek his whole life. 52 years old, gray at the temples, with tired eyes that had seen more than he ever wanted to. He had handled petty theft, bar fights, the occasional domestic dispute. Nothing that kept him up at night. Until Clara Voss. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. on October 15th. Clara had not shown up for school. That alone wasn't enough to raise alarms. Teachers got sick, emergencies happened. But Clara's neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patel, had noticed something that turned her stomach cold. Clara's front door was wide open. Her car was still in the driveway. And on the porch, her keys, her phone, and one single shoe. Just one. Mrs. Patel called the school. The school called the police. And Detective Ray Malone drove to Clara's house with a coffee in one hand and the quiet assumption that there was a simple explanation for all of this. There wasn't. The house told a story, but not a complete one. Inside, everything looked normal. Dishes in the drying rack. A book left open on the couch. A half-drunk cup of tea on the kitchen table, still faintly warm when the first officer arrived, which meant Clara had been there not long before. But no Clara. No signs of a struggle. No broken furniture. No blood. Just absence. The kind of absence that feels loud. Detective Malone stood in the middle of Clara's living room and felt something he hadn't felt in years on the job. Dread. He called in his partner, Detective Sasha Cole, sharp-minded and methodical, 10 years younger than Malone and twice as intense. She arrived within 20 minutes, snapped on her gloves, and began working the room with quiet precision. No forced entry, she said. She knew whoever came to the door, Malone replied. Sasha looked at him, or she opened it herself and walked out. With one shoe. Neither of them had an answer for that. They canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on every door within a 3-block radius. Most neighbors hadn't seen or heard anything unusual the night before. But one person stood out. A teenage boy named Dylan Marsh, 16 years old, who lived 2 houses down, told them he had seen Clara the previous evening at around 9:15 p.m. She was standing at her front door, he said, talking to someone. A man. Dylan couldn't describe the man clearly. It was dark. The man had his back to the street. Average height, dark jacket. That was all Dylan could offer. But here was the thing that made Malone's blood run cold. Dylan said Clara didn't look scared. She looked like she knew him. She was even smiling. And then Dylan went inside and didn't look back. That man, whoever he was the last known person to see Clara Voss alive. And despite everything that followed, every resource, every lead, every desperate attempt to find him, he was never found. When a woman goes missing, the first rule of investigation is devastatingly simple. Look closest to home. Clara had no husband, no boyfriend, at least not officially. But as Malone and Cole dug deeper into her life, they discovered that Clara Voss had layers that the town of Harlow Creek never knew about. Suspect 1, Marcus Webb. Marcus was a fellow teacher at Clara's school. Quiet, well-liked, coached the junior soccer team on weekends. On the surface, completely unremarkable. But 3 colleagues independently mentioned that Marcus had developed what one of them called an unhealthy attachment to Clara over the past year. He left notes in her classroom, showed up at the same coffee shop she visited every Saturday morning, once waited in the school parking lot for over an hour after his shift ended. For no apparent reason. Clara had mentioned it to a close friend just 2 weeks before she disappeared. She said it made her uncomfortable, but she didn't want to make things awkward at work. When Malone brought Marcus in for questioning, he was calm. Almost too calm. He had an alibi for the night of October 14th. He claimed he was home alone watching television. No witnesses. No proof. But no proof against him either. Suspect 2, Gerald Voss, Clara's own father. The relationship between Clara and Gerald was described by everyone who knew them as complicated. Gerald was a controlling man who had never fully accepted that his daughter had grown up and built a life independent of him. They argued often. Clara had confided in her best friend that she was considering cutting contact with him entirely. Gerald was interviewed twice. Both times he was emotional, tearful, insistent that he loved his daughter, furious at the suggestion that he could be involved. But during the second interview, something slipped. He mentioned a detail about Clara's house, a specific detail about the back garden, that had never been released to the public. Malone noted it, said nothing in the room. But outside he turned to Sasha and said quietly, "How did he know that?" Gerald was never charged, but he was never fully cleared either. Suspect 3, the unknown man. The one Dylan saw. The one with the dark jacket and the average height and the face nobody ever saw. Malone became obsessed with finding him. He reviewed every piece of security footage within a mile radius of Clara Street. He interviewed every person Clara had ever mentioned in conversations with friends. He even hired a sketch artist to work with Dylan, but Dylan's description was so vague the resulting sketch could have been half the men in town. The unknown man remained exactly that, unknown. 3 weeks after Clara disappeared, her body was found. A jogger discovered her in the woods at the edge of town, half a mile from a lake where she used to paint her landscapes. She was fully clothed. No visible trauma. The medical examiner's initial report suggested she had been there for at least 2 weeks. The cause of death was determined to be poisoning. Slow-acting, carefully administered. The kind of poison that didn't announce itself. It simply quietly shut down the body's systems over time, like someone slowly turning off the lights in a house room by room. This was not a crime of passion. This was planned, deliberate, patient. Whoever killed Clara Voss had thought about it, had prepared for it, had chosen a method that was almost impossible to trace back to a specific person without knowing exactly what to look for. The town of Harlow Creek stopped breathing, because this meant one thing with horrible clarity. Someone among them had done this. Someone who smiled at neighbors and held doors open and probably attended Clara's funeral with tears in their eyes. Malone hadn't slept properly in 3 weeks. Now he stopped sleeping altogether. It was Sasha who found it, buried in Clara's emails, an account that nobody had known about. A secondary email address Clara had created under a different name. And in that account was a thread of messages that reframed everything. Clara had been communicating with someone for 8 months. Secretly, intensely. The messages started professionally. Questions about a property dispute involving her father's land. The other person appeared to be some kind of legal advisor or investigator. But over time, the messages became personal. Deeply personal. Clara trusted this person completely. In one message, sent just 4 days before she disappeared, Clara wrote, "I think my father has done something terrible. I don't know who else to trust. I'm scared, but I need to know the truth." The response came within minutes. "Meet me at your house on the 14th, 9 p.m. Don't tell anyone." Malone read the message 3 times. Then he looked up the account the messages had been sent from. It had been created 2 days before the first message was sent. It had never been used for anything else. And it had been accessed for the last time on the night of October 14th at 9:32 p.m., 17 minutes after Dylan saw Clara smiling at a man at her front door. The investigation shifted entirely. Clara hadn't been randomly targeted. She had been lured. Someone had spent 8 months carefully building her trust, feeding her suspicions about her father, positioning themselves as her only safe option, and then using that trust to get close enough to kill her. But who? The email account was a dead end technically, created through a VPN, accessed through public Wi-Fi, impossible to trace directly. But Malone went back to something that had been nagging him for weeks. Gerald's slip during the second interview. The detail about the back garden that was never made public. There were only 2 ways Gerald could have known that detail. Either he had been to the house after Clara disappeared, which he denied, or someone who had been to the house told him. Malone pulled every phone record he could legally access. And there it was, buried in Gerald Voss's call history, a number that appeared repeatedly over the past year. A number registered to a prepaid phone, untraceable. But the calls had a pattern. They always happened late at night, and they stopped completely on October 15th, the morning Clara was reported missing. Whoever owned that phone knew exactly when to go silent. Malone sat in his office at 2 a.m. staring at the call logs and felt the shape of something monstrous forming in the darkness. Clara had trusted someone completely. That someone had used her own love for the truth against her, had walked up to her front door on a cool October night, had stood there while she smiled because she thought she was finally getting answers, and had taken everything from her instead. The case of Clara Voss was never officially solved. Marcus Webb moved away from Harlow Creek 6 months later. Gerald Voss died of a heart attack 2 years after his daughter. Some said from grief, others weren't so sure. The unknown man in the dark jacket was never identified. The file sits in a cabinet in Ray Malone's office to this day. He retired 3 years ago, but kept a copy. He looks at it sometimes, not because he thinks he'll solve it, but because he believes Clara deserves to be remembered, not as a victim, not as a case number, but as a woman who loved painting landscapes by the lake, who left little notes of encouragement on her students' desks every Monday morning, who had a warm smile and a quiet laugh and trusted people, perhaps too deeply. Some cases don't get solved. Some killers walk free. Some questions echo forever in the silence of small towns that thought they were safe. But here is what Detective Ray Malone knows with absolute certainty. Somewhere out there, the last person to see Clara Voss alive is still walking around, still breathing the same air as the rest of us, still living with what they did. And if there is any justice in this world, whether it comes in a courtroom or in the quiet hours of the night when the truth refuses to stay buried, it will find them. It always does. Rest easy, Clara. If you made it to the end of this video, kindly like, subscribe, and tell us what you think about this story.